Close your eyes for a moment and imagine waking up tomorrow without a single clock. No phone glowing on the nightstand, no microwave blinking green digits at you from the kitchen, no wristwatch, no laptop, no church bell tolling across the rooftops. The sun is hidden behind thick gray clouds, and you have absolutely no idea what time it is. Not roughly, not approximately. You don't know if it's 7 in the morning or 11. You don't know how long you slept. You don't know when your next meal should be, or how many hours of light you have left before the world turns black and the cold creeps in. For most of us, that thought is disorienting, almost dizzying, and yet, for nearly the entire span of human existence, this was simply what it meant to be alive. Your ancestors lived 300,000 years on this earth without a single ticking second hand, and somehow, against all odds, they not only survived, they hunted mammoths during precise seasonal windows. They migrated across continents in perfect rhythm with herds. They knew when the salmon would run, when the berries would ripen, when the stars would shift, and when the great cold would come crawling down from the north. We tend to think of time as a thing we invented, a grid we laid over the chaos of existence. But the truth is far stranger and far more humbling. Time was not invented in a workshop in Geneva or a monastery in medieval Europe. Time was first felt in the bones of your ancestors, written into their muscles, painted on the walls of their caves, and carved into pieces of antler and bone 40,000 years ago. To understand how they did it is to understand something we have lost. Because somewhere along the way, in trading the sky for the scream, we did not just gain precision, we gave something up. And it is worth asking, what? The evidence is real, and it is staggering. In 1908, an archaeologist named Edouard Piet unearthed a small, curved piece of bone in southwestern France in a rock shelter known as the Abri Blanchard. It was about 10 centimeters long, marked with 69 small notches arranged in a winding serpentine pattern. For decades, scholars assumed it was decoration. Then, in the 1960s, a researcher named Alexander Marshak, working with the Peabody Museum at Harvard, examined it under a microscope. What he found electrified the world of prehistory. The notches, he argued, were not random. They followed the phases of the moon, tracking roughly 2.5 lunar cycles. The Abri Blanchard bone, dated to around 32,000 years ago, may be one of the oldest known calendars on Earth. Marshak went on to find similar lunar markings on dozens of other Ice Age artifacts, including the famous Blanchard plaque and engraved bones from sites across Europe. His interpretations remain debated, refined, and challenged by scholars like Francesco Del Rico, but the underlying message is undeniable. Your ancestors were watching the moon, counting it, recording it. They understood deep in the marrow of their being that the universe had a rhythm and that rhythm could be remembered. But the moon was only one clock among many. There was the sun, of course, sliding across the sky in arcs that grew shorter in winter and longer in summer. Studies in chronobiology have shown that the human circadian rhythm is so finely tuned to solar light that even a few days outside in natural sunlight can reset our internal clock from the jet-lagged mess most of us live in. Your ancestors did not need a watch to know it was mid-morning. Their bodies knew. The angle of the shadow falling from a tree, the warmth on the back of the neck, the particular slant of light through the canopy. There were the stars, too. The rising of Sirius, the great dog star, signaled the flooding of the Nile to ancient Egyptians. But long before that, hunter-gatherers across the world used stellar risings to mark the turning of seasons. The Pleiades, that delicate cluster of seven sisters, appears and disappears from the night sky on a yearly schedule so reliable that indigenous peoples from Australia to the Andes to the Arctic independently used it to mark the start of planting, hunting, or migration seasons. The sky was not a decoration, it was a working instrument. And then there were the living clocks, the flowering of a certain plant, the return of cranes to a marsh, the thickening of a deer's coat, the smell of the air just before the first frost. Researchers like Eugene Hunn, who studied traditional ecological knowledge among indigenous communities, have documented hundreds of biological signals that hunter-gatherer peoples used to mark time with astonishing precision. To your ancestors, the world itself was a calendar, alive and breathing, ticking forward in 1,000 simultaneous voices. You are standing on a low rise of grass in what will one day be called central France. The wind is sharp, carrying the smell of pine resin and distant smoke. Behind you, the fire crackles in the mouth of a shallow cave, and you can hear the soft voices of your kin, the scrape of stone on bone as someone works a hide. It is late afternoon, though you would not call it that. You only know that the sun has reached the notch in the ridge to the west, the same notch it touches every year at this time of year, when the leaves begin to turn copper. You crouch and place your palm against the earth. It is colder than it was a moon ago. Above you, the geese are flying south in long, wavering threads against a bruised sky, and you can hear their calls echo down the valley. You do not need to ask anyone what season it is. You do not need to ask anyone what hour it is. Your body knows, the sky knows, the earth knows. And in the cave behind you, hanging from a hide cord, is a small piece of antler your grandmother carved when you were a child. 69 notches in a winding line. Each new moon, she would touch one and whisper a name. Tonight, she will touch another, and you will understand, without anyone telling you, that the great herds will arrive in 7 more notches. You will be ready. Your spears are already sharp. Here is where the story turns and where it cuts deep. Because this way of telling time, this immersive, embodied ecological time, is not simply a quaint thing your ancestors did before they figured out something better. It is the time signature that shaped your brain. Anthropologists like Kevin Berth have argued that the modern mechanical concept of time, with its uniform seconds and abstract hours, is a profoundly unnatural cognitive frame. It is something we had to be trained into, generation by generation, with bells and whistles and factory whistles and school schedules, and now the relentless pinging of notifications. For 300,000 years, your mind evolved inside cyclical, event-based time. Time that came in seasons, in moons, in the lives of animals and the deaths of stars. Time that was not money, because nothing was money. Time that could not be wasted, because it could not be owned. Modern studies on attention, on depression, on burnout, on the strange epidemic of meaninglessness that haunts our wealthy, well-fed societies increasingly point to the same uncomfortable suspicion. We were not built for the time we now live in. We were built for the time we left behind. And consider this twist. The very tools your ancestors used to track time, the carved bones and stone alignments and oral calendars, are also, almost certainly, the seeds of mathematics, of writing, of astronomy, of science itself. When that ancient hand carved 69 notches into a piece of antler 32,000 years ago, it was not just counting moons. It was performing the very first act of abstraction, taking the flowing river of experience and freezing a piece of it into symbol. Every spreadsheet, every equation, every line of code on every screen you have ever stared into traces its lineage back to that moment in a cold cave by firelight. We did not stop telling time the old way and start telling it the new way. We built the new way out of the bones of the old. And then, somewhere along the road, we forgot what we had buried beneath the foundation. So return for a moment to that opening thought. Imagine waking up tomorrow without a single clock. No phone, no watch, no microwave glow. Only the slow blue light bleeding through the window, and the sound of birds you cannot name, and the soft pressure of a body that, beneath the noise of modern life, still keeps the older time. Somewhere inside you, encoded in genes that are older than any city, older than any language, older than agriculture itself, there is a hunter standing on a rise of grass, watching the geese fly south. There is a grandmother in a cave by firelight, touching a notch on a piece of antler and whispering a name. There is a child looking up at the Pleiades and knowing, without being told, that the world is about to turn. Your ancestors did not need clocks. They had the moon. They had the sun. They had the wind on the back of their necks and the herds in the distance and the long, patient memory of a species that learned to read the universe as if it were a book written just for them. And on quiet mornings, if you stop and listen and breathe, you could almost feel it still.